So let's just start with Nolan. Let's start with you. Tell us how you got to where you are. Tell us something about yourself and about your company and the applications with AI that you're fooling around with.
Sure. I work with First Service Credit Union. We're about 1.4 billion in assets out of Houston. I've been with the organization 17 years, and it's a good company to work for because we like to push and be bold. Most credit unions are typically a little more conservative and fast followers to new technology. So it's nice to be have the ability to roll out some new things. As he mentioned earlier, I am a Kore.ai client, but Kore.ai is actually the third AI tool that we have implemented in the organization. We're currently using AI to underwrite consumer loans, and we're also using AI to for checking identity if people are opening accounts online, checking synthetic fraud, just making sure that the person who is on the other end of the computer is who they say they are. So looking forward to talking about that a little more.
Yeah, and just short, I work for Kore.ai. I'm based out of South Africa. And my journey with conversational AI started doing implementations for IBM, literally Cape to Cairo on chatbots. So that was before, Gen AI. So it feels like we had a problem of scarcity then, and now we've got a problem of abundance, hence the guardrails.
So I want to get back to Nolan because we had a question about responsible AI. And of course, there's a whole industry that's evolving around explainable AI, which are another layer of software that helps you determine bias and to reflect that. But in your use of it in underwriting, right? You don't want to provide a consumer loan that isn't the right one. You don't want to disallow someone who is appropriate for it. How did you deal with guardrails and responsible AI in that context?
Yeah, so with underwriting consumer loans, it's a very slow process because what you approve today, you're not going to know how well that loan is performing till 24 months later. So it's a very slow process, and that's kind of one of the struggles with a lot of the team is that people expect some instant gratification. And so, you want to be careful of making a decision today, and then the decision you're making today, you don't start feeling that pain till 24 months later when some of your loans start not performing and they go delinquent, and then all that's being shifted over to quite the burden on our collections department. So it's something that we watch almost on a daily basis. We're doing quarterly reviews. And it's kind of fun to watch because even loans that we decided to not approve, we have the ability to track that same loan if it was approved and funded by a different institution. So we're constantly learning to know whether we made the smart decision by approving the loan or the smart decision by not approving the loan.
So how do you actually see the decision logic that was used in granting the loan or not granting the loan? How is that visible to your staff?
Well, our loan staff, they really don't have much exposure to the engine behind the scenes. It's a couple of our underwriters and myself. But the loan decision engine has over 400 attributes that it analyzes. And what's cool about this is, a human, when they're reviewing a credit report and trying to just approve an auto loan, it could take them 10, 15 minutes. And they're probably looking at 20 to 25 data points versus the AI. It's giving quick, instant decisions, and it makes the process more consistent, and it's actually outperforming our human underwriters.
Wow. So Cobus, do you have any comments on that?
No, actually, I've got a question, if I may. I was just curious that you use open source models, and to what degree do you fine tune your models, or do you just use the models, out of the box?
So it's a little bit of both. The partner we use for our loan underwriting is Zest AI. And we've been with them for about 4 years now, and we're constantly tweaking the models and how much weight we want to put on how much capacity they might have, or how much credit card debt that they have. And so just depending on the actual loan type, we'll make tweaks accordingly.
Yeah, so just for clarification, is that more, would you call it traditional machine learning, more than it is Gen AI generated decision management? Okay, great. Yeah, so, we just got some data back from one of our automation surveys that showed that the responsibility for AI at the top has increased, where the C-suite is now like 85% responsible for pushing AI into the enterprise. What's the biggest misconception, do you think, at the board or C-suite level regarding what AI can do or cannot do?
Well, I mentioned something about that a little earlier. It really is the immediate gratification. I mean, even when we introduced Kore.ai into our contact center with virtual agents and trying to answer phone calls, I think you talked a little bit about in your presentation too, with the water on the phone or being a water drop. If somebody calls to check their balance or is trying to ask questions about their account, there's 50 different ways that a member can ask that question, but they're expecting the same result. And so constantly modifying like different utterances and just training the bot and staying on top of the bot. I mean, you really have to almost treat it like it's a human employee. I mean, you're constantly coaching it, mentoring it, and shaping it to answer those questions correctly for the members. I mean, finance is probably one of the most stressful things in a lot of people's lives. And so we want to make sure whatever answer that we're giving our members is accurate.
Got it. Okay. So let's talk about the shadow AI economy. And I talked about this in my talk a little bit about, how we're having all of these models sneaking into the organization. So there's a sprawl and a governance issue with models. Is that something you think about at the credit union at all?
Yes. We're trying to balance giving the staff the freedom to try these tools and innovate, but it's kind of a slippery slope, right? Because you do need some guardrails, especially in the finance industry when you're dealing a lot with sensitive information and people's PII. You can't just blindly start using tools and putting people's information out into the web. So, governance is a big part of that. And trying to, when you're trying to teach the staff this new technology, making sure that everyone is aligned with the proper tools and what you can and can't put openly on the web.
So do you have an enterprise architecture team that's sort of focused on controlling the sprawl of models in the enterprise? I mean, is that something that they're focused on?
Yeah, I mean, it's still it's in early stages. I mean, even though we have 3 AI tools that we're using, I still think that we're sometimes still splashing around in the kiddie pool, and we're still learning ourselves. And so it is a constant evolving thing that we're trying to keep our pulse on.
Yeah, so Kore.ai has made a discussion today about committing to a platform. We saw some BCG data that indicated that companies, some 80%, are looking at trying to unify their platforms to deal with this problem. Do you think that's a realistic goal for companies, or do you think that there are just too many solutions and too distributed and divergent an environment to really control that?
Oh, that's a tough question. Maybe I can answer it like this. When you mentioned previously about why enterprises are failing or the biggest mistake they make, I think one of the things is people don't realize the importance of data and having a data flywheel or a data feedback loop. That's for continuous improvement. And another one is how complex the systems can be. Just recently, OpenAI showed the architecture of ChatGPT and of their research API, and the number of models they orchestrate under the hood just amazed me. So I think many companies, I think enterprises misjudge the complexity and the hard work that's required to make something successful. And I spent the day yesterday with one of our biggest clients, and they were focused on basically three things. The one was the data feedback, to get the user experience back in data to improve their system. And they focused on the customers to improve the customer experience. And the third thing is they focused on, a small pilot and then iterating, growing that based on, improving the system. So the focus was completely away from, unification or, how many systems they've got. So in a sense, seeing that for me was refreshing. For me, it was very sober to see that. But just if I can mention, Craig, on the shadow economy. So what I find interesting is that, people want to use the tools, but it seems like they don't have the tools, officially. So what I find interesting from that MIT discussion, the shadow AI economy is tools people smuggle in,
Yes.
to use themselves. So the officially vetted systems fail them, or it's not their preference, but they bring their own tools in. And it's
at Forrester, when I try to use an alien tool, I get a alert that says this is not an approved Forrester tool, which I ignore. I mean, there's an option for proceed anyway, but we're going to see those be locked down more. So you mentioned data. I think data is really the foundational element towards success here. So Nolan, tell us about, in the contact center environment, customer service, what did you do differently to provide or expose more richer set of data to the models to be able to answer questions better?
Yeah, so when we were trying to find which solution to go with, there's several companies out there that provide out-of-box solutions that are pretty easy to stand up, but it kind of keeps you within a certain box where just the basics from what a member could ask you that the bot would be able to accommodate, like, what's my balance? Can I make a transfer? And so one thing that was important to us was because we are a financial institution, we're just a big leverage machine. And so typically, we bring in deposits, and we pay interest for people for their deposits. And we use those deposits and we give those out in loans in a higher interest rate. And so that margin is where we really make our money.
Yep.
And so we're really focused on efficiency and our operational expense. And if we really want to scale, we're going to have to go beyond those basic questions of checking balances and making loan payments. Because members have a lot of different requests, and the credit union expands over a lot of different areas. You have IRAs, you have investments, you have commercial loans, we have youth accounts.
Oh, you do commercial loans too.
We do commercial loans as well. And so so the bot being able to handle more complex things without the involvement of a human is going to be a big driver.
So I know the Navy Credit Union is probably the biggest one in the country, right?
They're the biggest one.
So where are you in that ranking, just roughly? Are you in the top 20 or top 50?
No, I think Navy Federal is, I think last time I checked, was around 160 billion.
Under management or assets?
Yeah, deposits. And,
yeah,
to put that in scale, I think Chase is north of 2 trillion. So even the largest credit union compared to the largest bank, we're still pretty small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, small and focus is what we need more of today, I think. So you don't have a little, loan sharking division that does higher rates for people that really need the money? No, you don't do that. I'm sure you don't do that. All right. So that's the data part. Has this AI narrative that's been going on for a couple of years now, has it really driven you to change your psychology about process, about moving from just efficiency for investment and automation to really changing the way you're working? Is that a psychology shift that your credit union has gotten to, or is it really more about just applying some, jazzed up automation to existing work?
Well, that's kind of where we got started, was just simple automation. In the finance industry, there is a lot of regulation that we have to abide by. And one thing that we are constantly fighting is fraud from all sorts, whether it be ACH fraud, wire fraud, account takeover. People will dispute transactions on their debit or credit cards, even though they are the ones who did it. They knowingly dispute those transactions just to see if they can win an investigation and get the money back, right? And there was...
It doesn't happen in South Africa, I'm sure.
And so because of a lot of the regulation and ensuring that we're meeting those things, those are the first things that we really wanted to automate. Is our notices to our members going out on time? Are we giving provisional credit in a timely manner? And so instead of our staff focus on those activities, because those are now automated, they can actually focus on things that actually move the needle and save the credit union money, like doing proper investigations and calling merchants and trying to determine whether or not these fraud disputes are legitimate.
So let me ask the more direct question. When you put in the AI-based underwriting system for your core consumer loans, did anyone lose their jobs?
Not a single person lost their jobs. In fact, our underwriters are transitioning from being the decision maker to almost being quality control of the bot's decisions.
It's great to hear. It's great to hear. I had to ask, it's a panel. I got to ask a tough question once in a while, right? Nolan, you've seen a lot of implementations of Kore.ai. You're the evangelist. You're out there talking to prospects about what's possible. What do you think is the most common mistake that's made with any of these deployments that are going through?
Well, I'll from my experience, our biggest issue is getting our member buy-in. I mean, anytime there's something new that we put in front of our member that they're not expecting, a lot of times they'll call in and just ask for a human because that's what they're used to. And so trying to kind of force some change and adoption, and I try to explain this to my staff sometimes that, like, I remember when Uber first came out and people were, so I'm supposed to get into a random person's car that I don't know.
Yeah, I still ask that question.
And then it just seems like overnight, we don't even think twice about it.
No, it's an unbelievable system. It's really unbelievable. Yeah, no, I get that. Although I have to ask, you think of the smaller financial institutions, right? And I'm a little amazed that the smallest S&L community bank is driving towards automation when their distinction is having a more personal, a more human relationship with their clients. That's what they got. They can leverage that. I mean, to me, the future margin for a lot of smaller entities is going to be in the memories. And those memories are created by humans interacting with other humans. In Spain, they've put in a law that companies can be fined if they don't get a human to the phone in a certain period of time. Yeah. Now, this is the wrong conference to go down this line of questioning, but do you find that that resistance you're talking about is real? That your members, what they like about the credit union is that they feel that there's somebody that knows them.
And I think that's also going to evolve with AI as well. When AI starts learning our members and their habits, and it's being a lot smarter on and recognizing what their needs might be to save them money, whether, if it's lowering a rate on a car refinance or doing a balance transfer on a credit card. But I think the technology is actually going to allow the smaller institutions to compete on a more even ground with the larger institutions. I mean, having a 24-hour 7 contact center was going to be quite a burden on a smaller institution because you're having to pay staff overnight and make sure that the department stays staffed. But if you can train up your bot to be able to answer these questions when outside of normal business hour, I mean, us being able to offer a contact center 24/7 so anybody around the world can call at any time, it evens the playing field.
Kobus, would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. Also, just to add what Nolan said is, I think there's also an aspect when it comes to adoption if a company is a digital native company, so adoption in those companies, I think it's much easier than maybe traditional companies. And then just to add to AI adoption, I was speaking to the AI director of a bank recently, and they took all the Gen AI tools away from their employees, like you mentioned. So that was it sounds harsh, but kind of like a forced adoption where there was nothing else to use, for work. So they supplied them, AI for what we call AI for work, alternatives, but there was no option then to use the alternatives. So that's also a way of, I guess, forced adoption. There's no other option to use in the workplace, and hopefully that will be better then,
Yeah. Well, I must tell you, I cringe a little bit when I see, the 70-year-old woman trying to read the 4-point font off an avocado to scan it at a kiosk in a retail store. In some instances, we push our customers off a cliff with technology, and we don't give them a good fallback position. So where do you see injecting humans into this more automated process makes the most sense for you, or do you think about that? We had a great comment here earlier about pinging humans. The humans are, become the, not subservient to the agents, but they get lit up by the agents at a particular time. Do you think about it that way at all? Perhaps not.
No, we do. In fact, one of our approaches is that we are very transparent. So when a member calls into the contact center, right out of the gate, we're telling them that, Penny is her name, and that Penny is an AI bot, and she's learning and she's training, and that if at any moment in time that they want to talk to a human, just ask for a human and we'll transfer. We're not going to try to put a member through a vicious loop or cycle where we're forcing the member to try to use the bot. And so I think that's kind of helped a little bit with exposing our members to this new technology.
That's excellent. Yeah, I think it's a great approach. So what is the first non-negotiable step? I get asked a lot, you talk a lot about what's the art of the possible and what could happen and all the great technology. And the burning question is often, what do I do first? How do I get started with all this? So what would be your non-negotiable first step in going on this AI journey?
Well, I think a lot of people feel that they need to just jump into the deep end of the pool. I think just kind of dipping your toes in and trying some new technology, like even exposing my team to AI and trying to get them more comfortable with it. I would just give little assignments like, okay, between now and Friday, just go into ChatGPT, just ask some questions, just start learning it. You don't have to go from a beginner to expert in a week. So as long as you start using the technology and start, you'll learn more about it, and you'll become a lot more comfortable with it. And then I think naturally you'll just kind of start pushing the boundaries. And can the bot do this? Can the bot do that? And so I think that's kind of a good starting point.
So I've seen that really help with the behavioral change that's required with employees too. Just give them Copilot, give them something to play with, and then they start to come to you with ideas because they see its potential. How about you, Kobus? How would you respond to that?
I love that idea, Craig, about introducing AI in the workplace. That's a way of speeding it up and adoption and that any feeling of animosity. I think one of the biggest areas of adoption is coding. I think I was listening to Mark Andreessen recently, and he said coding, code completion, and deep research, that's the two breakout use cases. So where researchers use it as a tool and coders. But I think for knowledge work as well, there's definitely an opportunity. If I can mention, just double click on what Kahal said, I was speaking to someone from Microsoft, and they spoke about noise in the workplace. Noise causes frustration and delays, and noise is caused by me asking my peers questions or my manager, and they found by having a personal assistant, as Kahal said, brought the noise down by 20%. So that already shows some gains in in AI use when no one was hurt or injured or fired, but there's some efficiency introduced.
So probably our last question here. Where do you see this all going? You know, if you were going to look future horizon, you know, dial ahead 5 years, where do you see your job changing and the workers that are with you? How do you see this evolving?
I think it's really going to just remove some of the tedious and mundane tasks from our day-to-day, which is going to allow us to focus more on face-to-face with our members. You know, if they're going to come into the branch, it's more of a relationship type of approach, not your basic, I need to deposit a check, but for more complex, it'll give us time to focus on more complex things that they have going on. Maybe they're trying to buy their first mortgage, or they're a first-time car buyer. Maybe they don't even understand how a credit report works. And so instead of constantly trying
More
to turn...
consultative. Yeah, more consultative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That makes total sense. How about you, Clovis?
You know, Craig, we spoke in the break, a group of us about 20 years ago, people asked on your CV or in a job interview, are you computer literate? Yes or no? And no one asks that question anymore because we all are. And I think people will become AI literate as well. You know, so AI will be have many facets, and it will become as familiar, you know, in 20 years' time as computer use is today, I would say.
Yeah, I like that. I think we'll all become AI operators, and those that don't will struggle. But I think those that do can have actually better jobs, more work-life balance. I think that's what it's all about. I'll just end with a short story, if anyone's still awake out there. That I was born in Manhattan, up on the West End Avenue, which I didn't realize was going to be the best address I'd ever have. But it was a couple blocks from John Lennon's place where he lived, and where Strawberry Fields is in Central Park. And John was asked when he was 8 years old by his teacher. Teacher said, what do you want to be when you grow up, John? And John Lennon said, does anyone remember who John Lennon was here? I guess. Okay. John said, I want to be happy. And the teacher said, you didn't understand the question. And John said, you don't understand life. And I think the real opportunity for all of us here, and we're the next generation of building automation. I mean, we're in a very coveted spot. And where we take that automation is a great responsibility. And I think we can bring it to a point where people can have a better life. You know, we've already seen that with working at home, how this technology allows us to have a much more flexible lifestyle. I mean, I can't imagine when I started my career what I had to do every day. Not to mention put on a crazy suit with silk ties and, you know, drive through incredible traffic and be there at 9:05, you know, if it never was. This is an incredible opportunity that we have. So, do you guys have any other closing comments? I think we're good. All right, well, thank you all very much.